right, if everyone can take a seat, and we're just about to get started. If folks at the back can, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nidhi Hegde, Director of Fight Corporate Monopolies. We're here today because Americans are fed up with the power that dominant corporations have over their lives. And poll after poll shows that large majorities are ready for government to take action to regulate and rein them in. And it's an established fact right now that a handful of corporations control the economy. And as they've gotten larger and richer, food prices have gone up, the cost of healthcare is through the roof, housing is unaffordable, and our small and medium-sized businesses are struggling to compete and survive. But over the last 3 years, enforcers at the Federal Trade Commission, the DOJ Antitrust Division, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have taken meaningful steps to challenge concentrated corporate power. They have investigated pharmacy benefit managers, middlemen who have driven up the cost of drugs for patients while squeezing independent businesses. They have held Wall Street investors and firms who have colluded to raise rents and evicted American families accountable. They have issued common sense rules like banning non-competes, click to cancel, lowering late fees on credit cards. And along with them, Congress has also introduced bills to tackle algorithmic price fixing across the economy, take on pharmacy benefit managers, and more. All these actions are popular and will deliver material benefits for working families across America. So over the next 4 years, we need to protect these initiatives and the progress that we've made and challenge the incoming administration to deliver for working families as we continue the fight against billionaires and monopolists who control the American economy. So we're really honored here to be joined here today by the U.S. senators and representatives from the Democratic Party who are at the forefront of this fight. You'll hear from them about how we can stand up for working class Americans by advancing laws promoting competition policy and enforcing and supporting aggressive antitrust enforcement. And I'd like to introduce a small business owner, Jessica Patterson-White, to kick us off. She's a bookseller and city council member who's here all the way from Minnesota, and she's going to introduce Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you so much. I am indeed Jessica Peterson-White. I own an independent bookstore and toy store in Northfield, Minnesota called Content. This week we're celebrating our 10th year in business. Thank you. Thanks. Early in those 10 years, Senator Klobuchar came and did a book event with us. We'll hope to do that again. And I'm here to introduce Senator Klobuchar as a real hero, a genuine hero to small business. Because she understands that what small businesses need is not boosterism or charity or free tote bags from credit card companies. We just need a chance to compete fairly so we can make our customers happy, so we can give our employees a good living, and so we can keep our local economies strong. Virtually every customer who walks through my doors of my shop on Division Street knows that they could buy books for less online. But enough of them choose our expertise and our commitment to the community over low prices that we're doing okay. They know that their dollars go so much farther when they stay local, but it's a luxury for them to make that choice when Amazon sells most of the titles that we carry below my wholesale cost. That's a luxury not everyone has, least of all some of our most important customers like school districts, nonprofits, and other independent businesses. Meanwhile, a tiny number of huge media companies control the wholesale and retail pricing of those books, as well as the content of the vast majority of the books we carry, leaving readers and authors with far too few options in publishing, and independent retailers without any leverage to negotiate the way that corporate giants can. Lack of regulation has made not just the world of books, but huge swaths of the shopping world into a race to the bottom, where a push to the lowest price sacrifices so many other things that matter to consumers and to communities, like local access to goods, preservation of historic districts and other infrastructure, local job creation, and human connection. Small businesses like mine are also facing an ever-shrinking, less transparent, and less accountable advertising landscape, thanks to the unchecked power of social media companies. Rich, my friend Rich, is the new owner of our local radio station. We're lucky in Northfield to have a local radio station and a local newspaper. But Rich can't compete for audience when he has ethical commitments, regulation, and accountabilities that we don't demand of Meta. If I want to reach new customers and grow my business, I have very little choice but to use social media, but I do so at my own risk, as I'm dealing with a mega corporation that couldn't care less about scammers, hackers, wild inconsistencies in pricing and results, or even the most basic transparency in our business relationship. We can do better. We can do better for independent bookstores. We can do better for all kinds of independent small businesses, and thereby do better for communities. Senator Klobuchar has been pursuing all the right policy changes to help small businesses compete, grow, and serve our communities and our employees. Policymakers across the political spectrum talk about their love of mom and pop shops, and I think they know that we drive the kind of economic growth and stability that helps people thrive. Senator Klobuchar walks the talk. She's worked hard for us, and we're ready to do whatever we can to help her continue this work, which is going to be all the more important in the coming years. Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for all that you do.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, and I do look forward to coming back. I think they're doing a paperback version of my last book, and I just told her I'll come back to Northfield. It's unfortunately called The Joy of Politics, which maybe doesn't fit our times. I was thinking as I walked in today about a gloomy time about, 8 years ago. And I was remembering that election, and I just want you to think about what happened since then, how people bounded back. For people who care a lot about some of our friends who lost. My daughter was in school at the time, and she was at the event, the Clinton event, and she was young, and she sent me a text. And I'm back in Minnesota mourning what's going on in the text. She's with her friend. She's at that event, and she writes, it's like 1 a.m, "Mom, what should we do now?" And I write back this total mom text, and it says, "You need to get on the subway. They're not going to go long. You need to get back. You need to get back to class." And she writes back, "Mom, I mean our country." And that question I stuck with for a long time. What do we do now? And I do want people to know, I see Chris Murphy's here. We just came out of our caucus lunch, devoted as ever to taking on these causes for the people of this country, in particular, as I look at this banner in front of me, the workers of this country. And so I want you to know that, first of all, and I know it's going to be a very, very difficult time. No one knows better than me. I'm the chair of the Rules Committee, so I'm chairing the inauguration ceremony. Yes, I am. But after that, we get to work. So I think you all know my interest in this actually came from way back zone. My grandpa was an iron ore miner, worked 1,500 feet underground, and back then there was just a few people owning those mines. Like, it was a real monopoly situation. In fact, when I was growing up, my mom would take me in her little red Comet when the Christmas lights were out to see the James J. Hill house. James J. Hill was a huge monopolist who, of course, owns all this territory up in the northern Minnesota where my grandpa was the miner. And we'd go look at that big house, and I didn't really understand all the economics of it, but now I do. And we need to have more people like my grandpa, who was able to save money in a coffee can to send my dad to a 2-year community college, and we went from there. That's what the American dream's about, and that's not going to happen if we have monopoly interests controlling our economy. So some of you may know I see Elizabeth Warren, one of our big heroes, in addition to Chris, on this issue that's here. Elizabeth and I ran for president at one point and got out of it as better friends. But the rivalry that Elizabeth had a few rivalries, but I had a rivalry with Pete Buttigieg that was rather notorious, even though we are really, truly friends. And when that campaign ended, Pete wrote a book called Trust. Right, and it got on the New York Times best, this whole thing. 6 months later, not to be outdone, I wrote a book called Antitrust. I did that just because I think there just has been not enough attention to why we must make antitrust cool again. And that is not just the province of economists and not just the province of expert witnesses at a trial, which a lot of people that don't want the antitrust laws to work have made it that way, particularly in these Supreme Court decisions. So I think it's on all of us to get this out there, that the beginnings of this movement was about workers in Chicago. It was about the Granger movement in Iowa and Minnesota, where farmers were taking on the cost of their inputs and the monopoly railroads. That's how it started. And it actually was a movement, and a lot of the start of the labor movement coincided with this. So let's get up to modern day, because I have two amazing colleagues waiting. And now I'm going to talk about 1894. No. But getting on to the modern day is you see this same thing happening right now, whether it is in healthcare. I give you one example of when the horrendous floods happened. The IV fluids were made by one company, a certain kind of IV fluid bags in North Carolina. We literally had to put off elective surgeries in Minnesota for 2 weeks. Okay, that's pretty crazy. And so that kind of concentration that you're seeing, whether it is coffins, yeah, there's only two makers, cat food, whether it is in ag, whether it is in tech. And I have particularly focused on tech in part because we just have no rules of the road when it comes to tech. And we are seeing this monopoly power used in really bad ways. So as we look into what will in the world happen in this next administration, just a few tea leaves. First of all, I have been able to work with some Republicans on this issue, and as has Elizabeth, as have Chris. It is really important that we try to make those reach outs right now, because I don't want to just stop in our tracks and yell about it for 4 years. It might end up being like that, and then we build a movement. But they have shown some willingness. Chuck Grassley, we were able to change the merger fees. Elizabeth worked on this as well. We changed the merger fees to get have less money for review of small business mergers, and of course for the big businesses, a lot more money that is helping to fund, depending on what the language is in this year's budget at the end of the year, but helping to fund our antitrust enforcers at DOJ and the FTC, which have done just extraordinary work. We also have had a number of Republicans, many of them actually conservatives, who are willing to speak out on this issue. And we've got to play on that and hold them to it, including J.D. Vance, who has claimed to care about this issue and is now going to be the vice president. So I want to see some action on their side, and that also depends on who they put in office. Both the Google and Facebook cases were started during the previous administration, the Trump administration, with Malcolm Delrahim in the antitrust division and the FTC for the Facebook case. And so now it's time to finish those cases, because Cantor and Kahn have aggressively pursued those cases. And we have AGs from all over the country, right? Republicans and Democrats that have joined in on that effort. So as we move forward and figure out how we're going to take on this monopoly power, which other countries have done much more aggressively, I think that we've got to make that a major focus, trying to move these things and hold them to it. Last thing I'll just mention on tech and is AI, and that even exacerbates the problem, especially when it comes to media. Senator Kennedy and I have the bill that has passed through Judiciary Committee twice now, which allows and pushes the monopoly media companies, in this case Facebook and Google, to negotiate the prices under baseball arbitration of what they should be being paid for content. This is a crisis right now if these, especially with AI coming down, if the media organizations are not paid for content. Think of the local news, the local radio, the small newspapers. So I'm hoping if we do move on AI, which there's a good chance we will, maybe not by the end of the year, but eventually, that we can include this news bill in a package. So that's where I am on this. I just want to get action. And the way we get action is with people never giving up on this issue and understanding that if you're pro-competition, as Jessica was pointing out, if you believe in small business, then you really have to be pro-competition. So let's make antitrust, it's become more cool, okay? It's like showing up, like people care about it. People are giving speeches about it. We're seeing more interest than we ever had before. So this is not the time to let the movement die. This is actually the time to push it forward, and we need you to do that. Thank you. And now, who's next? Are we having, is Elizabeth next? Okay, and next up, you know her. She's wearing her Vikings purple. No, not really. But Elizabeth has just been way ahead of her time on this issue. Talk about being ahead of your time, being willing to take on the tough fights, being willing to take the daggers for it. I'm proud to give you my great friend, Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, nicely done, Amy. Thank you. Thank you. And one more time for Amy Klobuchar and her terrific book, Antitrust. So, okay, these are tough times for everybody who's grieving. I hear you. For everybody who worries about people who are going to be hurt because of this election. That's where we are. But I think our number one job right now is to learn the right lessons and then figure out what are the tools available to us and how do we go forward from here. And the number one takeaway I have from what just happened that is relevant in here is the American people want a fair economy that works for them. And my proof points on that, look at where progressive economic issues were on the ballot. They won. Alaska raised the minimum wage. Missouri put in place paid sick leave. When voters have a chance to speak directly on these issues, these are what they care about. They understand what it means to have a playing field that's a little more level, a playing field in which they have a little more opportunity, and they go for it. Every way that we can measure, by asking people through polls, by doing focus groups, we see over and over that Americans have come to believe that corporations have too much power and that they are using that power to squeeze everyday families. And that's what you're here for. That's a part of what you now take on. So I think the big battle right now is who's actually going to set economic policy going forward. Is it going to be a handful of billionaires? We know what kind of policy they want to set. Or are we going to, are we going to show voters that Democrats are the ones who are willing to unrig this economy? So, So first of all, I want to start with a real thank you, and that is to our outgoing antitrust enforcers. They just have done remarkable work. Yeah. You know, they lowered the cost of inhalers. Sounds like I may need one right now. They've taken on price fixing in the rental market, in the housing market. I mean, they've just kind of been everywhere going after. They fought the big monopolies, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, Google. They have been in the fights. But you know what I think is the most important thing they've done? They have captured public imagination. They have said it is possible to do better. We are not weak and powerless against a handful of giant corporations that think they can just rip us off at will. They have shown us it is possible to fight back, and damn, it is possible to win. So, oh, that's good. If you guys will clap every now and again, I can cough. And think about what that has meant. You know, the world I used to live in, they've empowered lawyers. Have you seen the difference now? There are real live lawyers out there who are actually bringing antitrust lawsuits. That's something that just didn't exist even 4 years ago. People who say, wait a minute, those laws are there, they're alive. Whoa, courts are beginning to redefine how you do markets, and what kind of information has to be disclosed. That gives me an opportunity on behalf of a client to be able to bring an action. Second group, they have empowered the attorneys general around the states. Not all the AGs are in, probably not even a majority, but there's some who are starting to say, who have joined some of these lawsuits, who've said, oh yeah, count me in. There are some who have begun to build the alliances. Oh, I'm willing to use my resources. Thank you. I am willing to use my resources on this. If you're willing to use yours, how about we pool? And we bring a 2-state action or a 6-state action or a 16-state action. Think about that. People now in those antitrust positions within state AG offices, these are the guys who are new, who are exciting, and who are bringing in more young lawyers to learn it and to help them. But most of all, what they've done is they've empowered people. Look how many people wrote in to the FTC over the non-compete clauses. Look how many businesses were represented, right? I was designing wedding gowns, and little did I realize, down in page 15 of my employment agreement, somebody else now owns my name. Someone else now owns my whole livelihood forever and ever. Over and over, people wrote in and said, yeah, I thought I was the only one. And we have come to learn how pervasive these damn clauses are, how they are, shall we say, anti-competitive. They are called non-compete clause. It's right there in the name. And how many people have said, this is wrong, and I want to see a rule change. Think how empowering that ultimately is. Rather than just sitting there thinking, I am totally screwed and I'm never going to get out of this. Now people have some hope. And they have some hope that government, instead of being the friend and the enforcer of the most powerful in this country to squeeze every last nickel out of these folks, that government can actually be on their side. And government is the one that can say, no, we're not enforcing those rules. So I see this as a moment when, yes, would I like to have Lena and Jonathan and our whole team still in the fight, leading the charge from the positions they were in? You bet I would. But anybody who thinks the genie is going to get stuffed back in the bottle after January misunderstands what has happened in America in the last 4 years. And for that, I think we owe those folks an even bigger round of applause. So look, we got a lot of work we need to do. I so appreciate what Senator Klobuchar was talking about. On the legislative front, we got more than legislation. I'm all for legislation, but we have our voices. We have the ability to call out mergers. We have the ability to shine a light on them, to say, look what's happening here and here, and what that's going to mean, to remind people of what happened with baby formula, or to remind people of what happened with saline solutions. Our job, in part, is to be loud. And if you don't have the ability to use your voice, this isn't the room for you. We're for people who know how to stand up and fight. And we fight legislatively, but we fight not just an inside game, we fight an outside game. And an important part of doing that is going to be to call out what happens. Another is we need to support these state AGs. Encourage them. Invite them to come talk. Give them an audience. Lift them up when they get it right. Talk to people in their home states about why what they're doing is so important. Put some wind in their sails. And we need to keep upping the temperature in the pot. For every one of these monopolists or near monopolists, we need to keep calling them out. We need to keep making it more and more uncomfortable for them. We need to keep raising the question, why is there a $7 fee on this? Why is there a $14 fee on this? Why is it that the only place I can do X is through this one portal? Over and over and over. The antitrust movement does not die because there are some people in government who are on the side of the monopolists. It only dies if we roll over and play dead. And I don't know about you, but I don't plan to do that. So, I want to make one more point, though. And that is, we're here talking about antitrust. I love talking about antitrust. I could talk about antitrust in the morning, at night. Fabulous subject. But dig a little deeper. Antitrust is just one manifestation of an underlying issue. And that underlying issue is corporate power. Antitrust is part of it, but it's not all of it. Excuse me, look around the halls of the place where you are right now. We see the manifestations of corporate power every minute of every day. We see the lobbyists. We see the deals that get done after the fact because they're done behind closed doors. We see rule after rule after rule that is really helpful to the powerful and not so helpful to everyone else. I emphasize this because I want you to think more broadly about what it means to be in this fight at this moment. Come April of next year, we're going to see a whole bunch of tax cuts expire, which means there is a fight in front of us, no matter who wants it. It's coming because Donald Trump has promised that he's going to cut taxes for billionaires, for giant corporations, even more. And we have the opportunity to take that fight on straight up the middle and understand that is a fight fundamentally about corporate power. It's about corporate executives. It's about corporations in their corporate entity, but it's about corporate power. Who pays to keep this country running? Who pays for the roads and the bridges? Who pays to keep our armies in the field and our Navy out at sea? Who pays for every part of this? Is it going to just be hardworking families who pay over and over and over while billionaires have figured out how to scam the system and pay nothing, and giant corporations say on their earnings calls they don't care what the marginal tax rate is, because paying the marginal rate is for suckers. They've got so many loopholes built into the tax code right now, they don't come any place close to paying the marginal rate. Well, understand this, that tax fight is coming. And when you think of that tax fight, just reorganize it in your brain a little bit. It is a tax fight about corporate power. When we unite around that issue and push together around that issue, it eventually helps us on the antitrust and it helps us on the tax part. It helps us to remind people across this country that, yes, we can put government on the side of people. It's not just on the side of the giant corporations and their top executives. Keep in mind, as we go into these fights, antitrust is a little bit esoteric. Not everybody gets it. They get it when you can get it to something like, am I paying so much money to buy a ticket through Ticketmaster? Or why is it that suddenly I can't go be a wedding designer somewhere else, a wedding gown designer? But the tax one, they already got it. More than 70% of Americans, that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents, want to see taxes raised on billionaires and giant corporations, not cut. So we are going into this fight with the wind in our sails. And what the American people are asking for is for us to fight on their behalf. And I hope every time you see one of these headlines or you're in one of these, wrenching sessions and people say, how are we going to show working people that we are willing to fight for them? I got an answer. Get out there and fight for them. And you've got a tax fight in front of us that gives us the perfect opportunity to do it. So I see this as a moment where we are united. We know what it is we need to do, and that the American people are calling on us. Show us. Don't tell us. Don't get up and lecture to us. Show us who you fight for. And the first fight in front of us that we can do this on is on taxes. But think of it as a part of our antitrust fight, because overall it's about corporate power versus power that belongs to the American people. So let's begin this fight. Thank you all. You bet. And next up is my good friend from Connecticut, who does terrific work in this area, and that is Senator Chris Murphy. Chris, it's all yours.
Thanks. Well, thank you, everybody, for having us. I really can't imagine anything worse than coming to an antitrust forum and following Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. So I didn't write a book on antitrust. I didn't teach a class on it. I'm here because I figured out not too long ago that this is what the people I represent want me to be talking about. And so I set up a explainer series on social media, just trying to translate the policy that people like Amy and Elizabeth are so focused and so good on. So here's the only thing that I really care about today. It's the spiritual state of this country. It's the fact that unemployment is low and GDP is going up and crime is going down, and people still feel so shitty in this country. And the reason for that is because the way that we measure the success of our public policy is increasingly irrelevant to the way that people think about what's important in their lives. Having a job is important. Your wages going up nominally from year to year is important. People care about safety in their community. But what matters most to Americans is a sense that they have agency and power over their daily lives. There's nothing worse than feeling impotent, than feeling emasculated, than feeling powerless, especially when you've got kids that rely on you or you've got parents that rely on you. And that is the feeling that is seeping into every corner of our country today, a feeling that I have no control over my life, my economic life, my cultural life. And even worse than that, there's nobody in my neighborhood, in my town, that seems to have control either. Not everybody expects to be able to make the decisions that govern their economic life, but it used to be that you had powerful people that were close to you, the owners of the companies that you shopped at, the CEO of the company you work for, lived in your town or in the town next door. You now have cities and counties in this country where no one has access to anybody who is making the decisions over their lives, and it leaves people feeling like they are out of control. Now, Connecticut is probably not considered a hotbed of antitrust sentiments, but here's my polling and my campaign from this year. I pulled a whole bunch of messages, and there was only one message that I tested that hit 80% in every single demographic and every single party affiliation. This polls 83% with Democrats, 84% with independents, and 88% with Republicans. And the message is this: Americans feel like they've lost control over their economic lives and can't get ahead no matter how hard they work, and that a handful of enormous multinational corporations wield an enormous amount of influence over the quality of their lives without accountability or transparency to the public. That is an 80% message with Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Why? Because everybody is feeling this sense of being out of control. An antitrust policy, breaking up these big transnational companies, making it more likely that the person that runs the company you work for or runs the store that you shop at is closer to you, is more accountable to you, speaks to everybody. And by the way, Republicans get this. Not because they talk about antitrust, but because they think about this issue of agency and control. Okay, you can write off their immigration messaging as playing to racism and xenophobia. But it is also playing to a sense that people have that there are these giant forces that are outside of their ability to control. What is the immigration message about? Controlling the border, right? This is something that is not outside of our control. We can control who comes in and out of this country. We bemoan and chastise them for this just awful, discriminatory parental rights initiative, right? That's trying to put parents in charge of what books are in your library or condoning efforts to ostracize gay and transgender children. But what is it about? Parental control, giving parents more ability to make decisions over their kids' lives. It speaks to the fact that Republicans understand sort of the emotional zeitgeist of so many families in this country and are tailoring policies to the actual ways that people feel. That's the magic of antitrust, is that it speaks to this very real crisis that exists in this country. And so I think the only way back, right, is to focus on this lack of power that people feel. And one of the primary ways to speak to that lack of power is to go after these unaccountable, untransparent economic entities and bring that power and that locus of control closer to these people and closer to these communities. And this thing is moving so fast, so quickly, that over the next 4 years, it's going to become more real to more people in more tangible ways. And I'll just leave you with this. My youngest son plays hockey. And youth sports was one of the last places that private equity hadn't figured out was ripe for consolidation. But they're doing it as we speak. And so I was just told this last weekend that if I live stream my child's hockey game, my kid's team will be penalized and lose a place in the standings. Why is that? Because a private equity company has bought up all the rinks in the Northeast, has installed their own closed-circuit camera system into all of the rinks, has provided a paid-for subscription service to all of the families, and has required any team that wants to play at the rink to tell their parents that if they videotape the game, instead of paying and having your parents and your aunts and uncles pay for the subscription service, your team will be docked points in the standings. Now, word is just getting out about that small but really important change, right? You can't videotape your child's hockey game to show to their grandparents. The hubris of these companies, right? The unchecked power that they have is in the middle of boomeranging on them. But only if we organize, only if we realize that this is a unifying message, only if we realize that if the Trump administration does not build on the work of Lena and Rohit and Jonathan, that there will be hell to pay if we are crystal clear about the contrast between us and them on this vital mission of giving people back that agency, power, and control that they feel every single day that they are losing. So I am not an expert on this topic. I have not worked as long as Amy and Elizabeth and Bernie on this. I just know that this matters maybe more than anything to the people that I represent, and it is one of the most vital projects as we try to explore how to fix what went wrong in this last election. So with that, I know, by the way, that Pramila was here and she had to leave because we're all talking too long, but I'm just going to make an executive decision and turn this over to the guy that I follow on all these issues, Bernie Sanders.
Well, let me thank you all for hosting this event. and thank Chris for his, I think, very perceptive remarks. I'm going to be brief and tell you where I'm coming from. I think as a nation, for a variety of not difficult to understand reasons, we don't talk about the most important issues facing our country. So you can go through an entire presidential campaign, Senate campaigns, and sometimes the most important issues are not being discussed. To my mind, amidst climate change, amidst a broken healthcare system, amidst bigotry of all kinds, et cetera, housing crisis, the most important issue facing our country is the very rapid movement toward oligarchy. All right, you familiar with the term oligarchy? Now, the media often talks about the Russian oligarchy, and Putin is surrounded with these trillionaire guys who run the country and who siphon off huge amounts of money from the Russian people. But somehow that discussion doesn't come back to America. So let me just touch on it, and it touches on the issue of powerlessness that Chris Murphy was just talking about. In America today, which is not discussed in the corporate media, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of this country. Got it? All right, more inequality. You have 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Elon Musk and a couple of others. Do you think that that is an issue that we might be discussing? We don't discuss it at all. You have the top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. Okay? So you have massive income and wealth inequality. And when people ask, how does it happen that Trump wins an election, and why are people so angry? My God, are they all racist and sexist and homophobes and xenophobes? Well, some of them are. Most of them are not. It may have something to do that in our economy today, over the last 50 years, real inflation accounted for weekly wages for the average American worker has gone down. All right, you all hear that? Over a 50-year period with an explosion in worker productivity, the average American worker, inflation adjusted for dollars, is in worse shape than he or she was 50 years ago. And then when we talk about oligarchy, it's not only massive income and wealth inequality, it is not only the stagnation in wages for working class people, it is also a massive increase in concentration of ownership, which is what this discussion today is about. So you have in sector after sector, whether it is agriculture, whether it is transportation, whether it is financial services, whether it's healthcare, whether it's media, or as Chris was just mentioning, insanely, youth sports, what you're seeing is fewer and fewer large conglomerates owning what is produced and the conditions that they are produced and what workers are paid and the prices we pay for those goods. So you have, for example, and one of the astounding realities, and check it out and see if I'm not telling you the truth, but right now you have 3 large Wall Street investment companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Combined, these are 3 companies combined, they are the major stockholders in 95% of the S&P corporations. 3 companies, 3 boards of directors are the major stockholders in 95% of the corporations. So instead of saying, well, here is a corporation, it's who owns it, blah, 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 turns out they're owned by somebody else, and often owned by somebody else. We were involved in the last couple of years as chairman of the Health Education Labor Committee, involved in a number of strikes. And what would end up happening, we would start talking off to somebody who we thought had some power over wages and working conditions. So no, they were owned by somebody, and then they were owned by somebody. So enormous economic concentration of power in this country. And then, not content to having a handful of people own the economy, They're now moving very, very rapidly, and that is what this campaign was about, owning the political process. So as a result of Citizens United and other Supreme Court disastrous decisions, we have seen billionaires pouring huge amounts of money into the political process, into both political parties, into state elections. Crypto money, drug company money, whatever it may be, has played a huge role in influencing these elections. So the bottom line for me that we have to deal with is never before in American history have so few multi-billionaires had so much wealth and so much economic and political power. And let me tell you, these are not nice guys. They may come off as nice guys, and they may make contributions to the local hospital or Boys and Girls Club, but they are very, very greedy people, and they want it all. And this issue of oligarchy is not just an American issue. It is a global issue, and these guys know each other, and they work with each other. There are reasons why Elon Musk is in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, because he's dealing with other multi-billionaires on a global economy which also has more income and wealth inequality than it ever has had. So what this struggle is about, to my mind, is power. And one of the most immediate manifestations of that struggle is at a time when we're seeing a revolution in technology through artificial intelligence and robotics. Who's going to benefit from that? Benefits. If you are a worker out there, you're in a job, and you have artificial intelligence which makes you much more productive, you can produce a lot more, what will be the results of that? Will your boss come up to you and say, hey, good news, we have machinery now that makes you much more productive. You're going to get the same pay, but you only have to work, say, 32 hours a week. Congratulations. Or, hey, I'm sorry, we got a machine that could take your job. You're out on the streets. And that is the immediate struggle that we're facing. So there is a lot to be done. And in my view now, is that it has always been, the antidote of enormous economic and political power on the part of the few is mass organizing at the grassroots level among working people to stand up and fight for an economy that works for all. And people know, Chris was mentioning some of his polling, and we've done polling as well. And we ask people, do you think we should get money out of politics? Overwhelmingly, yeah, they do. Do you think we should guarantee health care to all people as a human right? Yeah, they do. Do you think we should make public colleges and universities tuition free so that all of our young people get an opportunity to get an education? Yeah, they do. Do you think we should expand Social Security benefits so that we don't have a situation where 25% of elderly people in America are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less? Should we expand those benefits by lifting the cap on taxable income? Yeah, we should. So there's an agenda out there which is enormously popular. That agenda often doesn't get to the floor of the House or the Senate or into media discussion because of the power of the big money interests who control media and control the political process. So my message to you is go into your hearts and you determine what is most important, because you ain't going to see it on TV, you're not going to see it on the floor of the Senate or the House. You determine, and you'll be surprised. A lot of your friends and neighbors and co-workers will agree with you. So when you say, hey, why aren't they talking about this? How can you not talk about three people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society? Somebody's crazy. Am I crazy or are they crazy? Well, they're crazy. You're not. Okay? So trust your instincts, be bold in your thinking, and let us go forward together. Thanks very much.
Okay, everybody staying with us? Yeah? Is everyone else still out there? We are going to be transitioning into our House members now. Thank you for your patience. And first we'll be hearing from Rep. Scanlon. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to thank the Economic Liberties, Small Business Majority, and all the organizations who helped organize today's event. You know, as we work together to figure out a productive path forward in the wake of the 2024 election, shockingly, antitrust work may be one of those paths forward. You know, in the 117th Congress, last term, not this most recent term, we had kind of a renaissance in antitrust work. Some of you here were involved in that. In the House, we were able to advance meaningful bipartisan investigations and reforms to tackle big tech, bringing together bipartisan coalition of members to explore ways in which big tech was stifling competition and harming both consumers and small businesses, and then to push for policies to rein in Facebook and Google and Apple and Amazon. And that work was evidence that these issues can bring together members with very different viewpoints, and we hope it means that there's a real bipartisan path forward for antitrust legislation in the coming years. That work is obviously needed now more than ever. Nearly every part of our economy is concentrated in the hands of just a few companies. Whether we're talking about big tech, airlines, phone companies, internet and telephone service providers, banks, retailers, a handful of behemoths dominate each of these sectors. Now, historically speaking, this means that we all pay more for the things that we buy. Customer service suffers, workers are paid less, and companies get so big that they're effectively above the law. This means small businesses are constantly being squeezed by larger companies, and those that are able to successfully compete are too frequently acquired in order to thwart that competition. So what we do about this, about antitrust, about competition, will determine whether we have a thriving economy that benefits everyone, or we continue down this path of income inequality and have an economy that's increasingly inequitable and stagnant and is dominated by shareholders and CEOs. The food industry is Exhibit A of this problem, and the results of last week's election should have made it clear on both sides of the aisle that rising prices for essentials and, above all else, food were a major factor in voters' choices. In nearly every industry within the food sector, 4 firms can control 50% or more of the market. You can tick down the list: beef, pork, poultry, grains, corn, soybeans, fertilizer, agricultural equipment. Each market is controlled by just a handful of large corporations. Next, look at food retail. The 4 biggest grocery retailers make up 70% of sales. Among food suppliers, companies like Kraft or General Mills, 4 firms control more than 60% of sales in every grocery category. Some categories are almost entirely controlled by a single company. All these companies at every point in the food supply chain leverage their size to charge higher prices and stifle competition with tactics like prioritizing product placement, exploiting crises like the invasion of Ukraine or natural disasters or the pandemic. So, excuse me, it's going around. Some of the largest companies, especially those in tech and defense, act like mini fiefdoms that wield massive power, but they're not accountable to any democratic processes. So they pay for the best lawyers to avoid accountability. They pay for the best accountants to avoid paying taxes. And they pay the best lobbyists to block any meaningful reform, whether big or small. So what are we to do? I think Senator Klobuchar is onto something when she says that we need to make antitrust cool again. And I think a big way of how we do that is to talk a little bit less about antitrust and more about stories. When we had some of our hearings with respect to big tech, I got to talk about diapers because there was a very small company that had done great work with providing diapers through the internet to parents at reasonable prices, and they got squeezed out by Amazon. So that was something that could resonate to people, and it certainly was a lot more understandable than talking about antitrust law. Many of these problems that we are talking about could be addressed by a well-funded, properly staffed FTC and DOJ. Beyond funding, Congress and antitrust enforcers have to work together to fine-tune our antitrust laws and enforcement tools to meet today's challenges. Throughout this most recent Congress with respect to food prices, I've advocated with Senator Warren and others for the revival of the Robinson-Patman Act, which gives the FTC the ability to go after many of the anti-competitive practices that are common among food retailers. We also need to pass a federal price gouging law to protect consumers from the kinds of price hikes that we've seen in the wake of natural and other disasters. And finally, I think we really need to rethink how to address inflation in the modern economy beyond an exclusive reliance on monetary policy. We have to address the cost of living crisis that is pinching families all over America, and antitrust should be one of the major tools in that solution. I know that the members of Congress here today that are speaking to you are committed to building an economy that works for working people, and it's on you and me and everyone here to keep fighting and to build on all the progress we've made. So thank you for your interest in the topic. It's a little bit wonky, but I think it can be cool, and let's keep going.
Great, and next we'll hear from Representative Lee, who has been very patient. So let's give her a round of applause as she makes her way up here. Thank you.
How you doing? Good afternoon. I'm just a humble House member, so I'm just excited to be here with such prestigious senators and House members. Listening to Senator Klobuchar about hopefully making antitrust cool or sexy. I don't know if we're going to do all that, but I do hope that we will make it relevant. So with that said, good afternoon. I know, and we've heard it, it's been a difficult week. And I'm not going to be somebody who attempts or endeavors to rush us through grief or sorrow or fear or concern. But I am going to be someone who says that this isn't a time to retreat. It's a time to lead. And these are the topics where I believe that we are best poised to lead the country. And indeed, if we think and we know there's going to be a lot of analysis that's going to come from the election. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to pontificate. We're going to see a lot of postmortems. And there's still much data that we need to read. But I think that one thing that we can probably all agree on is that what we should learn and what we are learning from this election and from every election is that our communities, especially our most marginalized, our most vulnerable communities, they are feeling the pain. They are looking for relief and hoping for something different. And when we think about the communities that are most marginalized and vulnerable, they're looking at rising costs of housing and healthcare and groceries. And these corporations are just squeezing them and taking them for everything that they can while they're making record profits and using their unchecked power to drive up prices and reduce choices. And they're hoping that we'll stay distracted by pointing the fingers at one another instead of holding them accountable. So I'm Summer Lee, and I'm really happy to be here today because the folks that I represent in Western Pennsylvania, especially in places like Braddock where I grew up, they know all too well what happens when corporate power goes unchecked. And to be clear, this isn't just an economic issue. This is about survival. So many places. The reality is that people from communities like mine have been systemically shut out of wealth and opportunities that monopolies hoard for themselves. So take, for instance, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, also known as UPMC. It's the so-called nonprofit hospital system that dominates healthcare in my in my district. And it didn't just become a giant overnight. It exploited weak laws, tax breaks, and a lack of accountability to go from this small, university-based hospital system to this empire that controls nearly 3 out of 4 hospital jobs in our region. And it reigns as the largest private employer in the state of Pennsylvania. And to keep in mind, they are not in Philadelphia. UPMC's monopoly power, it doesn't just mean fewer choices and higher prices for healthcare. It means they control hospital workers' wages, their patients' access to care, and even the broader health outcomes of our communities. And you know who bears the brunt of this. Black and brown folks, low-income communities, working class and poor people who are tired of being squeezed at every turn. But let's not be mistaken. This issue goes far beyond UPMC, as we have heard, from tech to housing to food to pharma to media to agriculture. Monopolies are strangling our communities. When one corporation can decide what health care we get, whether we can afford rent or if our neighborhoods have access to fresh food. That's not just bad for business. It's a direct attack on our dignity and our lives. These corporations are more than happy to watch us fight each other while they consolidate their empires, crushing workers and driving prices up. And let's be real, they are counting on it. That's why I and others who you've heard from today are in Congress. We're fighting for real change. We don't believe in half measures or empty promises. We need bold, transformative legislation to break up monopolies that have been allowed to crush our communities for too long. We need strong antitrust laws that don't just tinker around the edges, but go straight into the heart of the issue, putting people over profits and blocking these corporations from using their wealth to continue to buy out competition and skirt taxes. And when we say buy out competition, I also mean political competition. Every day I hear from constituents who are exhausted. They're exhausted from feeling like no one has their back. They're tired of working harder and harder while their wages stay flat and their costs are going up. They're tired of politicians who tell them to tighten their belts while negotiating these backroom deals with the corporations that are driving prices up. The system is not broken. We know this. It was built this way. It is working exactly the way that it was designed for the rich and for the powerful. And if you're going to dismantle it, we are going to have to fight together. So I'm proud to stand here with you all today, demanding an economy that values the people over the profit, that lets small businesses thrive instead of getting crushed, that gives workers a fair shot, and that makes sure that no one is forced to rely on a food pantry just to make it through the month. Together we can, and we are going to, push forward laws that shift power away from these monopolies and back to the people where it belongs. And we can show these corporations that they can't keep growing unchecked and treating our communities as mere sources of profits. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot to work through, but we have a very clear path. And irrespective, and maybe perhaps indeed because of the mandate that we've seen from these election cycles, it's definitely time that we prioritize this and move forward. So thank you all so much for being here. I do know who's next. Do you want me to introduce them? Is he here? Okay. Next, I want to say that Western Pennsylvania is very well represented here because Western Pennsylvania is at the heart of fighting corporate power, corporate greed, price gouging, all of those. So I'm so excited and so just incredibly thankful for my colleague and friend from my next door neighbor, very, very, very close, being able to come back here and continue in his fight against corporate greed and antitrust and monopolies. So Chris DeLuzio from PA 17.
Western PA is in the house. I love it. I hope you guys noticed that, by the way. And there's something going on in our Commonwealth about taking on corporate power, standing up for folks. And we are showing a way to do this. Mic drop on cue there. Look, thank you for convening us. Great voices from the House and the Senate we heard from today. I think an opening line is the American people are sick and tired of being ripped off. They're sick and tired of powerful corporations pushing us around, putting everything ahead of our safety, our communities. Where I am from in Western Pennsylvania, we saw decades of bad trade policy and stuff pushed by Wall Street to plot to strip us for parts. We are tired of it. There's a tendency, I think, in our party to always look for a win-win, and maybe that works sometimes, but sometimes there's a bad guy and you got to fight him. I think we need more of that in our politics. The goal, I hope, of this movement is simple: to make life better, to make life less of a ripoff, to give small businesses a chance, give workers more power and say on the job. That's the idea of this. We've been taking some fights in Congress, not all winning them yet, but I'm trying to do some things in committees that don't always see these kinds of fights. I sit on the Armed Services Committee. We saw defense contractors go from 51 down to 5. They are heavily consolidated. So anytime you see things over budget, delayed, quality problems, I think that is often a reflection of a lack of competition in the defense industrial base, and we are all paying for it. We see it in even trying to get provisions passed in the defense bill about getting pricing transparency. The Best Price for a Military Act, bipartisan piece we got in the NDAA. We'll see if it makes it back through conference. That's a big fight to just get pricing transparency on what the public pays for things that is about our national security and our defense. Transportation Infrastructure Committee. My constituents and our Ohio neighbors live through the derailment in East Palestine. Folks understand that is about powerful railroads putting their profits ahead of our safety. my community and communities like ours across the country who live along or near the tracks, this is not just some theoretical thing. This is a real risk for communities like ours. And the railroads are essentially left to regulate themselves. Why? Because they have power and they wield it. We should be taking that power away from them to stand up for our safety. We see it in pharmacies. I met with small business owner, pharmacies or pharmacists in my district. They are getting squeezed. They are seeing pharmacies close. PBMs are wielding way too much power. And again, we are all paying for it. Patients who need their medicine and their prescriptions filled are paying for it. They have fewer choices, and it's getting more expensive. I heard from farmers in my district, small business owners, farmers. And you know what they were mad about? Going in to see the meat processors, the poultry processors. They cannot get prices that are fair. They cannot get terms that are fair. Why? Because those folks have power, and they wield it. We see this problem play out across our economy, and we see it, I just mentioned, farmers, small business owners. These are allies, and they should be allies in this fight to take on corporate power. I think that is a path for us to build this thing. So look, for American capitalism, for our economy to work, there has to be competition, and this corporate power is starving it out. We see it across the economy of ours. For small businesses to have a shot to compete, we need strong antitrust. For there to be safety for our communities that matter more than just some profit somewhere, there has to be antitrust enforcement. There has to be a willingness to confront power and regulate. Something has to matter beyond just profits. Our jobs have to matter. Our communities have to matter. This country should matter. And that requires us to do the mobilization that I think we're all doing here. And the labor movement is a big part of that. Because for those jobs to matter, for workers to have a say, they are a big part of this coalition. And the organized labor movement is how this thing can succeed. Now, here is what our Republican counterparts are up to. This is the Republican Study Committee budget proposal for this past year, okay? Like 80% of House Republicans are in it. It is trickle-down economics, right? It calls for, of course, attacking Social Security, raising the retirement age, gutting antitrust enforcement, taking away the power of Medicare to negotiate drug prices, doing the bidding of Big Pharma to get rid of some of the caps from the Inflation Reduction Act. That is what the House Republican leadership is still doing. That is their vision. It is trickle-down economics 101, and we got to beat it. And the question is, you know, why, right? What is the reason they want to cut everything in government? Well, they're trying to protect tax cuts for the rich and powerful. That is the core of what their economic program is. They don't want to have billionaires pay a penny more in taxes. I think they should. So look, I come from a frontline district, competitive district in Western Pennsylvania. You hear the way I talk on these issues. I ran on these issues. I was spending money running ads on these issues. We can win in competitive places, talking about standing up for people's dignity, bringing down costs, taking on corporate power. These are winning messages. I saw the more conservative county in my district, Beaver County, go toward Donald Trump and come toward me in my race. We can do this and win across the country. And I hope the message you hear, as you see and hear from members all over the country who might talk in different ways about this important anti-monopoly movement, this fight against corporate power, this fight for workers and people's dignity. We need a broad coalition. It is a winning coalition. So thank you for being part of it. We got some work to do, but we can win. Thank you. And a mic drop. I'm sorry.
All right. Last but certainly not least, and if you're still with us, we love you. But we love Representative Ballant-Moore, and we're so glad for her patience as well, and that she's going to bring us home as our last speaker. Rep. Ballant? Give her a round of applause. Yeah.
Okay, this is where I adjust the mic because I'm even shorter than they think. Okay. So, you know the expression, everything's been said, but not everybody has said it? You know the expression? It's a joke. All right, look. I will associate myself with remarks of everyone who's come before me. These are giants when it comes to antitrust. And I include DeLuzio in there. I include Summerlee in there. And so what I have to add is just a little bit more of the human component. When you look at the election that was just run, there is no bottom to their cynicism. There is no bottom to their cruelty. There's no bottom to their willingness to squeeze every last dime out of working people. We don't have to like it in order to accept that that is the reality. That is where we're at. So we need to be clear-eyed about that. There is no bottom. So our charge is to meet it head on. And as folks who have come before me today have said, we have to be ready to go toe-to-toe on every single fight. Why? Why is this important? This is the piece that I think we forget about as leaders in Congress. It's about basic human dignity. That's why it matters. That's why it matters. I came to this job having been a teacher for years. I was a middle school teacher, which is perfect preparation for Congress in many ways. But I ran because I thought about all the students that I had and all of their parents who were working so damn hard and didn't have a pot to piss in. That's why I ran. Because they live on down those back dirt roads in Vermont in a trailer that's falling apart, and they think to themselves, how will I ever have a better life for my kids and my grandkids? So when we think about these issues, we have to figure out how we're talking about antitrust and trust busting and monopolies that always puts the people at the center of why we're doing this work. And I think sometimes in politics, we get we get caught up in the game of it and talking about the fight of it that we forget that it all comes down to stories. Are we telling not just compelling stories, but are we lifting up the stories of the people that need us to show up for them? So that is my mission. And I've been thinking so much since Tuesday. How do I handle my own fear in this moment? As a queer person, as a woman, I think about my staff. I've got 2 members of my staff that are worried that their families are going to be deported. I've got trans and non-binary people that have worked for me who are freaking out. And it would be really easy to give into fear and the fear in this moment. So what I want us all to do as we think about how we do this fight, a successful fight, is we have to replace our fear with deep curiosity and not look for easy answers. Look at the complexity of people's lives and always see the inherent dignity that we all have, that our constituents have, that the people have in our communities. And if we are keeping that at the center of our work, that will be a compelling issue for all of us. So, thank you.
All right, we made it. Well, it's impossible to plan an event that goes half an hour over alone. So I do want to thank all of our partners, and many of whom are still here, National Community Pharmacists Association, Main Street Alliance, Small Business Majority, P Street, and Tech Oversight Project, and all of you who have joined us both on the live stream and in this audience. Fight Corporate Monopolies hosts this event. We are very serious about this fight against corporate power. We'll be watching every appointment, every policy, and making sure that people are serious about the fight for the working class of this country. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.